And I remember going to her office and she was like, you cannot work in any of these other magazines because you will not be able to put up with the bullshit. I think The Devil Wears Prada is probably one of the most accurate fashion depictions of the fashion industry. But I think Zoolander is the other one that's really good.
Hi, I'm Sally Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously.
Work Friends.
Today on Work Friends, I'm joined by Lauren Sherman, fashion correspondent at Puck, the writer behind the newsletter Line Sheet, and host of the Fashion People podcast. Lauren is one of the most prominent voices when it comes to coverage of the fashion industry. She has her pulse on all its major players, insight into how business is done, and, most importantly, is the expert at distilling it to the masses. She's notably also held the role of chief correspondent at Business of Fashion and co-authored her first book last fall, Selling Sexy, Victoria's Secret and the Unraveling of an American Icon. Lauren's one of my favorite interviewers, and I'm thrilled to flip the tables today and get into how she's built her remarkable career. Now, on Work Friends, Lauren Sherman. Lauren, hello.
Hi.
I'm incredibly excited that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
It's a long time coming. We were talking about this, but I've been following your work since the beginning of time, I feel like.
Thank you.
But there was and I mentioned this to you already, but there was a piece on Gentle Monster and Business of Fashion in 2017 that I read that both got me obsessed with you and obsessed with Gentle Monster.
I'm so happy to hear it. And I am also obsessed with Gentle Monster. And I loved meeting those guys. It's such a fascinating business and all their trajectory and selling and all of that stuff. I mean, and also the experiential retail, all of that. I was very geeked out about the story, so it makes me feel good that you liked it.
It was a different time then, but those profile pieces, like a Lauren Sherman Business of Fashion profile, that was like a thing that put businesses on the map. But we're going to get really into your career, but before we do, I want to start by hearing your biggest oh no moment this week. What went sideways and how did you handle it?
Well, I was late for this,
which was right on time.
Oh my God, there are many every day. I would say yesterday I block out Wednesdays as a writing day, so I don't do any meetings. The only things I'll do are calls if I'm reporting or whatever. And yesterday, one of my favorite team members from Puck was in town and only had time to meet for lunch yesterday, so I had lunch with her, which I needed to do, and I wouldn't go back. But then I didn't write in the morning. I was on the phone all morning, and then I got back to the office, and I didn't end up writing until like 9 o'clock last night.
Ooh.
But it's fine. It's not her fault. It's my fault. But it was a thing of like, why don't I have more discipline? I always say yes.
Were you up late then?
12:15, which is late for me.
Does it help to write though under that pressure of
I love a deadline.
Yeah.
But I prefer getting up at 5 a.m. and finishing by 10 a.m. than being up at 9 and finishing by 12 or whatever.
Same. I'm not really a writer, but for all my tasks, it's nice to be under the gun. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. You grew up near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
What was your childhood like, and what stands out in terms of early forms of work? What you're thinking about in terms of career?
I was thinking about this the other day. My parents, who split when I was very young, I grew up my mom's single mom household. They both are very hard workers. My mom worked many hours. She went to night school. My dad, I will talk to, he still works. Like, they're just I came from a family of workers and readers and people who were kind of like, if you want to spend money, you gotta make money.
What kind of work were they doing?
My parents actually met, this is funny. My dad was a college dropout. My mom didn't get her degree until she was much older, but they worked. My mom is from Pittsburgh. She moved to Columbus with her sister, who was going to art school in Columbus. And they met. They were both at this denim store that I think I asked my dad the other day what it was called. I think it was called levitation, and I looked it up and you couldn't find it because it was kind of probably what this is the late 70s, was probably similar to what the Gap was at that time. So selling Levi's and other stuff. And my mom was the women's buyer, and my dad was the men's buyer, because if you worked at a retail store in 1979 or whatever, you also were probably the buyer of the product that was in the store. And I remember my mom telling me about going to a trade show in New York, and so they were buyers, and they both loved clothes. My dad tells the story about buying my mom this Bill Blass winter coat for like $400 in 1981 or whatever, which clearly they could not afford it. And so they both worked, and my dad still does retail stuff. My mom ended up working in more medicine, and she became I forget, it's like a PA, but in the autopsy room. So it was like a physician's assistant, but like an autopsy tech or whatever. It was I guess it was cool.
I think that's cool.
She would do autopsies.
Yeah.
It was interesting, but that was a long time later. But yeah, so they did both have a very strong interest in fashion. And I remember being young, my mom loved Calvin Klein, and she wore Halston perfume, and we would go to Marshall's and buy Ralph Lauren sheets and all of that. And my dad was like I remember when I was in my 20s living in New York, my dad came to visit, and we went to the Polo. It was when Ralph Lauren still had the store around the corner from the Polo Lounge. Yep. And I'm sure I asked the PR to help me with reservations for drinks, and we went to the store, and he bought a Polo, and then we went around the corner and had drinks at the Polo Lounge, and he was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that is definitely where I get my interest in clothing and fashion from. They both were into brands and the value of them and all of that.
And reading, it sounds like you mentioned they both were bookish.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't call either of them bookish, but I grew up with a lot of people reading a lot, and my grandpa was. My mom grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh called Glassport, and it was very working class. Everyone worked at U.S. Steel or whatever it is, like all worked in the mill. But my grandpa was a school teacher, and he had a college education. And I think, to be honest, like that changed the trajectory for me for sure, and a lot of people in our family. I don't know if my family would consider it that way, but because he was born in 1919 and it was a health teacher, and it just made it that us going, like my generation of the family, there was no doubt that, and we all went to college, all the cousins. So it just changed things a bit. But yeah, I started reading very, very, I don't know, very young for actually knowing how to read, but like reading a lot very young. So kindergarten, first grade, I was obsessed with the Babysitter's Club.
Oh yeah.
Eventually, I was just talking to someone the other day about Anne of Green Gables, and
loved. And did you watch the PBS shows too?
Obsessed. Yes, I was obsessed.
I wonder what that would be like to watch now. I think I'd still be obsessed.
It's funny. There's an Instagram account where they do memes.
Please.
I'll send it to you.
Please.
It's so good. But it was so formative for me. And I obviously, like Louise May Alcott, Laura Ingalls Wilder, all of that. And then Tuck Everlasting, like these books, just these classic novels. And I was just a really big reader. I wanted to be a writer from a very, very young age.
You knew that?
Yes. Yeah. I really wanted to be like a news journalist and I loved watching morning shows, and I loved Joan London on Good Morning America. And so I was like, I'm going to be and then I eventually, I'd say by the time I was in high school, I thought I want to be a fashion journalist and go to Paris and write about runway shows and all of that. It's very interesting that it's just such a random thing for this person growing up in suburban Pittsburgh to think that that's a job that you can have and that you're going to do it. And then I actually did it. It's kind of crazy.
Do you know how it got into your head? I mean, obviously your parents have love for fashion. You have a love of reading.
Yeah.
Are you consuming magazines? Are you
So that was part of it. One thing was that my mom, I had gone to like a trade school to be a radio disc jockey or whatever, which I found out years later. She never pursued it, but there was definitely, I think, on her end, we watched the news a lot. Like
I
the
love
news
your
was
mom.
on. Yeah, yes, she's a funny person, but the news was on a lot, and there was something, and she was consuming. She reads a lot and was consuming. Just she was a big consumer of media and movies. We used to watch like 3 or 4 movies every single weekend. The only thing I wasn't allowed to watch were horror films. So I never saw like Freddy Krueger and all that stuff. But I saw a lot of other really inappropriate stuff at 6 or 7 years old. But yes, so when I was probably 9 or 10 or 11, we were at CVS or something. I wanted to buy a fashion magazine, and she said, "You can buy this magazine, Sassy. It's the feminist magazine."
You're so lucky. That's so different than all of our experiences.
Well, it was interesting because it was right before Jane Pratt had left Sassy, so I got a few issues of her, and I just remember being like, "Oh my God, this magazine is so cool. This is how I want to dress." I didn't know how I wanted to dress. I knew I wanted to try different things, but there was a pair of mustard colored Converse high tops, and I thought, oh, this is the kind of thing I'm interested in. These are the kind of, it gave me a personality. And from there, I just became totally obsessed. I was really into, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but also sometimes write about it. I was obsessed with Liz Tilberis era Harper's Bazaar, and I've said this to Jane Pratt, like her and Liz Tilberis together were sort of, I thought, oh, I want to be them. I didn't really know. We didn't read we didn't have the New York Times growing up, things like that. I didn't know that you could be a fashion critic at a newspaper or really be a reporter doing it. I thought I would go work at a magazine and be a fashion news editor or what have you. But it was really early. I knew that was the thing I wanted to do. I didn't want to make the clothes. I didn't want to style them. I just wanted to write about them.
Yeah, this is like sending me back to our childhood because the world was so much smaller then too.
Totally.
And so it's like you had that magazine. I remember I had like a tear out from InStyle with like a Lacoste shirt that I can still see with a jean short and an aviator Ray-Ban, you know.
Good.
But it's like you didn't just it wasn't as coming at you as quickly as everything is now. So
Totally.
you just have these like memories seared because you have a magazine for a month that you're like consuming over and over again.
It's so true. And my husband's mother, I wouldn't say she collects Vogues, but she has a lot of Vogues. And every time he goes to visit her and he'll come back from Chicago, he brings me a few. And I was looking through, he brought me some from like 1999 and 2000, the last time he was there. And it just gives you this feeling that no media does now. Occasionally, but this just feeling of opportunity and the world being open to you. And it did feel so distant then. Now everything feels so close. It's harder to like get that magical feeling, but there is something about how important those things were to I'm sure there's images that still inform how you dress every single day, and it was a fun time to want to get into that business.
I agree completely. I think you then started working for your school newspaper in high school. Is that right?
Yes, I wrote for the school newspaper, and in college I wrote for the paper for a bit. I think there was like a magazine. I did that stuff, but I started interning. I remember I covered in the women's volleyball team for the school newspaper in college and would go to the meets with them. And but the thing I started really early, and back to this idea of working and having to work and feeling like that's work gives you like worth or whatever.
Yes, yeah.
I started interning really early. So I interned at a magazine in Boston called Platinum. Shout out to B. Mandelbaum, who is my friend who I met while we were both interning there. I haven't seen her in a long time. I'm sure she's well. And then I also interned the summer after my freshman year at Nylon magazine.
Yeah.
I lived with my aunt in Aberdeen, New Jersey, and I would commute in 3 days a week and work at Zaslow's Fine Collectibles on the other 4 days. And it was really cool because nylon was still really new. And I got the internship very random. I just called them and
Yep.
they were like, sure, come in. It wasn't, I didn't prep. I remember I tried to get into Condé and Hearst and all these things, but this just like kind of came to my fingertips. And it was also nice because it was in Soho. I think their offices were on Green or Mercer, and it was it was such a, I mean, 2001, summer of 2001 in New York City. It was a really interesting time to be there, and Soho was still Soho, and it made me also realize that I could do it. I met all these people. It was very intimidating for me, but I thought, you know what? I know I'm going to be able to hold my own in this situation eventually. And so I did a lot of internships, and I ended up interning when I studied abroad in London at this company called Quintessentially, which is a lifestyle concierge service. And it was started by these two guys. One was like an ex-film producer. The other guy is now in the government. He's like an MP, and he's in the UK. He came from like very aristocratic. He's Camilla Parker Bowles' nephew, and it was like a concierge service for rich people. If you wanted a reservation at the Ivy, you would call them and they would manage it for you. But they had a very nice glossy magazine that they did in partnership with another publisher, and then also a website, and they would send in newsletter a couple times, I think maybe every single day, and it would be like top tips, best places to have afternoon tea. It's like so silly, but I interned there and was very, go-getter, and they asked me to come back when I graduated from school. So I moved to London a week after college.
This is a unique college like internship experience for our generation. Just
for sure.
I think a couple of themes that have popped up though are deeply millennial. Like the work ethic is consistent across most millennials, where it's like, just give me anything to do, I will do it.
Yes.
And just a desire to have any job anywhere,
My grandparents gave me essentially like an advance on my inheritance so I could study abroad.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was awesome. And so because I couldn't take out a normal student loan to study abroad. So I wanted to do something that was valuable. So I went to Emerson College in Boston, that actually doesn't have like it's a pretty niche school. It doesn't have a rich study abroad program. So I found a program through Boston University that was very much like, stay in dorms, they place you, they get you an internship. And so it felt like it was worth it for me to do it. And then I ended up getting a job and picking up and moving there and living in like a weird boarding house in Finsbury Park. But it was so fun. I was there for 2 years. And I do think it was very important to me in college to like, I remember a person I interned with at Nylon saying, just write something every day. And she was probably 6 months older than me. And I remember thinking she was so full of it, but it was true. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not a supernaturally gifted writer, but I have good ideas, and the more I've written, the clearer my ideas come out. And it is this thing of just, you gotta crank, and that is very millennial, like the cranking mentality.
There's also, though, and you said this earlier, you talked about like, I can do this. Like, you got to New York and you recognized that you could accomplish what you were dreaming as a young girl. I do think, like, for me, I remember starting grad school and looking around and being like, I don't know, everyone knows more than I do. And then once you're in it, you're like, oh no, I can work hard enough and I can do this. I think there are themes of like courageousness and boldness that come up a lot in your career. I think you're already showing signs of like taking these leaps that a lot of people would not do.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's the way the confidence my mom instilled, she was kind of like, you can do whatever you want. She's like, I'm not going to pay for it. I'm not going to be able to help you that way. But like, I'm not going to say no if you want to go to a private university or you want to do these things. And also, I realized very quickly that I have a lot of advantages in life, but the ones that I didn't have, I just started to understand the people that do have these advantages, like what is different about them. And the thing that's different is that they think that they deserve to do this. And all I had to do, I remember when I was an editor at Fashionista, we started having this contributor who had done a lot of really amazing work, had published a book, had worked at a very big magazine, had had cover stories, and was the same. I was probably 27 at this time, same age as me. And I was so intimidated. And they filed their copy. And I thought, oh, they just think they can do it. It's not because they're the best in the world. It's just that they think they can. And so I do think a lot of it is just sort of that sort of one track mind and believing it.
Yes, and that it's that removing that like permission structure that's like artificial, and really a lot of it is a result of the patriarchy too. I think within this society, women especially hold themselves back.
Totally.
Give yourself permission to just go for it, and like what's the worst that could happen?
Yes, exactly. The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out, but at least you have to try. And it there is so much of it, like, who do you think you are? And you have to just think, not care that people are going to say that or think that or whatever. And that part of it, really early on, I was like, I deserve this just as much as anybody else.
Yes.
So it's some stuff's going to work out, some stuff isn't, but I have to believe that it is. And in the end, I mean, I'm always thinking, damn, I really did get a lot of what I wanted in life, which I feel really, really lucky, but I also know that I worked my ass off for it.
Yeah, totally. And took these like bold leaps. I remember after undergrad, sitting around at home, this is 2007, and waiting for a friend to commit to moving to Chicago with me. I went to Chicago because New York was too big. You know? But I waited, and finally, after 6 months, I just packed up the car and drove to Chicago by myself with no job and really not knowing anyone there.
It's awesome.
And it was the best decision of my life. But it's the same with all of those big choices where it's like 2 years, 3 years in Chicago had a lasting impact on me personally and professionally, and I think that they have merged over time, you know. But the decision to go abroad for however many months in undergrad, it's such a short window, and maybe it doesn't pan out. There's even upside in that, but
yes, I
grew so much faster, you know, like it was like it put me on an accelerated track. We have a lot of questions to get to because we got to bring it back to you. Let's see. All right, so you did the concierge service at Quintessentially.
Yes.
And then you had an opportunity at Forbes pop up. Is that right?
So I left Quintessentially because I wanted to move to New York. I wanted to work in a magazine. And I said this to the people who owned Quintessentially, and everybody was super supportive. And they gave me like a little gig when I got to New York, and I temped. I found a very cheap apartment in Washington Heights. I think it was $500 a month for the room, in this very nice apartment with lovely people in a great neighborhood. And I started temping at the speakers agency, and that I got through a temp agency. I was just interviewing for jobs. I kept interviewing, job. I just really wanted to work at a magazine, and I interviewed I got there in August, and this was December or November. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh man, and I had given myself, I was 22 or 20, I had just turned 23 maybe. And I had just turned 23, I believe. I'm not the best at math, but and I gave myself till 27 to be a staff writer at a magazine or whatever. I thought, if I don't do that, I'll go into something that is a little bit easier. Now I understand that like nothing is easy, and it's just you do what you do. But it would have probably have been harder for me to do some of the things I thought would be easier. But I kept interviewing, and I was just having a hard time. And at the end of the year, I interviewed at Hearst for an online web editor job at Cosmopolitan. And then I was also interviewing at Forbes for this online assistant news editor job. And the Forbes one did not seem as glamorous. It was like, I was in the newsroom, but it was essentially proto social media. So I was audience development. So I was pitching our stories to MSN and Yahoo for them to syndicate them and things like that. And the Cosmo job, also not glamorous because they didn't have any online original content. It was just essentially taking the print content and putting it on the website. And I thought, ugh, this sounds terrible too, and I don't want to work there. I want to work at a fashion magazine. And I remember there was this thing called Media Bistro, which was like, I don't even know how you describe it. Laurel Tooby was the founder, but it was they had a job board, and then they did classes, and you could take like fiction writing. And I took a fashion and beauty writing class, and this woman who had worked at Glamour and a bunch of trades, I came in and told her I have these two job interviews I'm doing, and she said, you work at Forbes, you can work wherever you want after that, but if you work at Cosmo, you can never work at Forbes, which I will say that I do not think that's true. It's especially not true now, but back then in 2005, it was kind of true. And so I just forgot about the Cosmo thing. I took the job at Forbes, and it changed my life. It was the best thing I ever did in terms of career trajectory. I remember I interviewed to work at a trade for what are those, like romance novel? There was a trade. I interviewed at so many weird places, and it really did. Like, if I hadn't done that, I would have never met Imran Ahmed, who is the founder of Business of Fashion. None of my career, I would not work at Puck. Like, my career would not exist if I had not taken this kind of weird job at Forbes. And I was also lucky the managing editor there happened to have gone to Emerson and was like another Emerson person who's in journalism and was really great. I think one thing I always give advice is like, be open, have a goal, but also be open to how you get there, because this was definitely not in the plan.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be at Teen Vogue or Jane Magazine or something, and I got Forbes instead, but it ended up being, the best thing for me.
Are there things that are coming from these experiences that you feel like helped you find your voice or helped you hone a skill set that added value to what you eventually ended up doing at Puck?
For sure. I think a big thing is working at quintessentially, I was around a lot of really wealthy people and writing about things for the rich and famous or whatever, like how they live. And so it was like an entrance into the luxury industry, which was just sort of consolidating at that time. Like LVMH and Kering were still really pretty small. And so I was seeing what people were like. There's this thing in the UK called Dalesford Organics. They have restaurants now. You can go to one in Marylebone. At that time, it was just a farm, and she would do these Christmas baskets, and all the sort of posh people would buy them. And I remember writing about them, like that type of thing, being exposed to that kind of a consumption. And I think when it comes down to it, what I'm obsessed with is like, why do people spend their money the way they do? And it turned out that the business and the mechanics of the business was what I was really interested in. But it starts with, why would someone want to buy that thing? And so when I went to work at Forbes, that added another layer, because I wasn't only writing about fashion. I was doing like any lifestyle stuff, any wealth porn. Like that's where wealth porn started. Is that era of fastest passenger jets and all this stuff. Like, it's all these crazy SEO stories that we would write. And the other thing at Forbes in that era, so I worked there from 06 to 2010 basically, was that they considered themselves the theater critics of business. So you were not allowed to quote an analyst. You had to come up with your own idea. And this was even online. Like, I did write some print stories, but I mostly wrote for the website, and which was very robust at that time. Like, they had a big staff. I had to come up with a thought and have an opinion about it. And then I went to work at Fashionista, where I'm blogging, and all it is, you don't have any time to do any reporting, and all it is having an opinion. So I think that was a really good training ground for me. And it also made me realize that I didn't really want to work at a big fashion magazine. I eventually dabbled, but I really love the mechanics and what happens behind. As much as I love clothes and shopping and consuming and looking at fashion, I really love the steps to how they get to the store floor, and that made me realize that. And I was very lucky. They let me. Forbes was not a place where you really had a beat, and they really let me focus on it, and it was a really fun experience. I also met my husband there, so it's
fate, destiny.
Yeah.
I feel like so, and I know this is cliche, but so many outsiders' perspectives of this industry is from The Devil Wears Prada.
Yes.
And do you feel like you had to navigate any of that in terms of how like because fashion is really specific. Like it's been a new industry for me in the last 10 years, coming from business and tech and
Yes.
very type A personality and being surrounded by that my entire upbringing. But did you have to did you feel any of that pressure?
I didn't. I kind of ignored it. Like there are things in the early days that I think, oh, that was really happened that way because I, wasn't a sample size, or because I didn't have fancy clothes or whatever. Like, yes, there are things very early, but I think because of I wasn't working at a PR agency or a fashion magazine or a retouching studio or whatever, where everybody was obsessed with this stuff, that I was, for the most part, I didn't let it affect me. I would say when I went to work at Lucky Magazine, which was I was just a huge fan of the magazine. I was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years into my career, or maybe almost 10 at that point.
What years?
I was there from just 2011 to 2013.
Okay.
But so it was Brandon Hawley was the editor-in-chief. It was after Kim left. I would say that I was 6 years, so I think I was 28 when I took the job. I was 6 years in. I was confident enough in my abilities as an editor and a writer that I would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And also I remember going into, I've told this story before, this woman, Alexis Bryan Morgan, who was a fashion editor, and she was one of the fashion directors there. I just really liked her. She was Anna Wintour's the kind of stepdaughter. I don't know if Anna was married to her dad or not, but whatever. She was like quote unquote nepo baby, but she was honestly the most down to earth and realistic and honest person who worked there. And I remember going to her office and she was like, you cannot work in any of these other magazines because you will not be able to put up with the bullshit. Like there was just there's so much. It's not, I'm sure I think The Devil Wears Prada is probably one of the most accurate fashion depictions of the fashion industry, and I've been writing about the sequel, and it sounds like the plot is amazing and it feels very realistic, but I think Zoolander is the other one that's really good. It's so true.
Favorite movie of my childhood.
Yes, but I would say
movie.
that I think there are some things that are very true. Like I do think there's just a lot of insecurity. That's the truth, that there's a lot of insecurity and you kind of have to ignore it or navigate it, and you can't get too caught up. And again, I was lucky. I haven't experienced this the way a lot of other people have, but I also think you kind of gotta like not get caught up in the politics of it all. You gotta put your head down and do your work. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there are things that are wrong. Like there are a lot. If you look at the staff of Vogue now and the way they operate, they're really supportive of each other, and that actually, I read a lot about Condé Nast. The culture of Vogue is good. Mm-hmm. The people there are they love their jobs. They work well together, and of course there is stuff, but I would say that I'm glad that I wasn't in the assistant pool at Condé Nast when I first started, because that I don't know if I could have handled. But 6 years later, when I was already like a pretty senior person, I knew I had all these people's numbers and I was fine. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's sort of like that idea of you might have a goal, but don't worry about how you get there, because there's a reason for it going the way it does. That might sound woo-woo, but I do believe that.
No, sure. I agree with that completely. Yeah. I think that your career is a testament to that too.
Yeah.
But I think there's like a confidence and just there's an edge to you that I like a lot.
Thank you.
And I think it keeps you sort of one step ahead and has kept you one step ahead.
Thank you.
In your career. Okay, I don't want to miss any major steps. So after Forbes, you went to Fashionista.
Yes.
As its executive editor, and then returned at a later time as its editor at large.
Yes. Yeah.
You also served as the executive digital editor of Lucky, which shuttered in 2015.
Yes. I left long before it shuttered.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for
But
important asterisk.
but I was contributing when it shuttered. But so I basically went there for a year and a half. Was very much realized it wasn't for me, and went freelance. And so my best friend Leah Chernikoff, who's now the executive editor of Harper's Bazaar, she was the editor of Fashionista, and I said, can I just come back and I'll give you guys right of first refusal on my stuff. I need health insurance. And so I went back. I did Fashionista, Lucky, Fashionista, plus a bunch of other stuff in the second round.
And then eventually made your way to Business of Fashion.
Yeah, so I knew Imran I interviewed him for one of the final things that I did for Forbes. And so I met him before Business of Fashion was like anything more than his personal blog that he was doing on the side with consulting. And he was the first that I gave my notice at Lucky. I had set up this Fashionista gig, and he was the first person I emailed. I said, I'm free to write, and I really love writing industry stuff. I thought I'd eventually work at Women's Wear Daily. Like I thought that would be a good path for me.
Yeah.
Because I love inside baseball. And Imran said, yeah, why don't you write this thing on the explosion of the online secondhand market? And so I wrote this piece. It was my first freelance byline in January 2013. And then I started writing for them really regularly. And about 2.5 years later, I went full time with them.
Were you strategizing towards any sort of, not end goal, but like, is there a direction? You mentioned Women's Wear Daily. Or was it following work assignments that spoke to you?
So my goal, I would say by that time I was like, I want to be a reporter at a newspaper, at the Journal or the Times or something, because I had been there been in the city long enough to understand, like, I want to be a reporter. I don't want to be a magazine. Puck, we have amazing headlines and they're not mine. I'm not a heads and deck person. I'm not great at puns, and I'm not a display copy person. I really admire it, and I can say what I know when it's right or wrong. Like this morning, I said, this needs judged to my editors because it was just not exactly right. And sometimes I can do it, but it's not where I'm a reporter. And I knew that. And I thought there were a few, like whether it was a newspaper or Bloomberg or something like that, I thought that that's where I would end up. But it was really when I worked at Forbes, I realized this industry is just growing so fast. Terry Agins was truly the only person, she was the Wall Street Journal fashion reporter for a long time, writing about the business, even at the papers. Like, they would write sort of about the business, but there still isn't someone at the New York Times who covers the luxury industry exclusively. There is someone at the Journal now, but he's the first person to ever do it. So, out of Europe at least. But Terry was like she had written this book called The End of Fashion, and my editor at Forbes had given it to me when I first started, and he said, well, if you want to do this, you have to read her and understand what she does. And what I realized was this industry is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. They're going to need more people to write about it. I might as well become a business journalist or a business of fashion journalist and become an expert in that way. In the same way that I think a newer generation, there are a lot of sustainability journalists. At that time, it was really about the business. And I thought, if I can do this, I'm going to be much more valuable. And it turned out when I went freelance, when I left Lucky, it was because I was writing for Marie Claire, I was writing for the Times, I was writing a lot for the Wall Street Journal, but also for Inc. magazine and Bloomberg and all these things. So it was this thing where I knew I had a network in the business journalist community from working at Forbes, so people would give me assignments. But then also I knew people, there were some that moved over to a woman named Leah Goldman who went from Forbes to Marie Claire, who gave me a couple of assignments. And so I had this sort of network. But the thing for me was always, I am going to be the go-to business journalist of this era for an industry. And I mean, I I will say I had good foresight because,
Oh, yeah.
LVMH is the biggest business in Europe on a good day. And so when I started, that was definitely not true. And so I'm glad that I always had a very commercial sensibility. Like, I want to be a journalist. I have to make money. I don't have a trust fund. I don't have like any backup. I need to, if I want to do this and not have to go into an adjacent industry where you get paid triple the salary, I have to market myself. And so I have been like very clear about that from the beginning. What that meant has evolved and changed. I've never had a real goal of a very particular position or job. Like the BOF thing, once they started developing that business and hiring people and becoming a daily publication with a lot of reporting, then it felt totally natural, but I was already there. And the same thing with Puck. Like, I thought BOF would be my last job in journalism, that I would stay probably another 5 years or something, and I would eventually either move to a different beat, like I live in LA now, cover Hollywood or something, or maybe go into TV writing or something like that. I just thought, what am I going to do? Like, BOF is the best journalism job I'm ever going to get. I get paid well. I get to write what I think. And then Puck emerged, and it was like the perfect job for me. And I couldn't have put that on a vision board because it didn't exist before 2021.
Yeah, I think there's something very like pragmatic about your entire approach, but I think that it's also about perspective. Taking the job at Puck, it could be perceived as something very risky, and I think a lot of people in your position would view that as a risky choice.
Yeah.
Hindsight 2020, to me, Puck is like one of the coolest media companies. I think the way that y'all are writing is so edgy and different and refreshing. It's like very fun to consume the content coming out of Puck. But part of that is also self-fulfilling, where a handful of people of your stature, your tenure, take that leap.
Yeah.
It does work out because you guys, like, you just have something. But it's interesting because, I mean, I almost want you to speak to what you said earlier, where it's like the riskier choice would be not taking it, is what you were talking about.
For sure. I had not won. I wanted to work there. And I remember saying to a friend, I was on book leave for a month in July 2022, and a friend of mine and I who's in media, she worked in magazines for a long time, I said, I really want to work at Puck. I wish they would do a fashion vertical. So I just don't know if they'd be interested in it. And I was sad about it because I was just like, and if someone else got this job, I'd be so mad because I know this is right for me. And I think, so I ended up reaching out to them, and they also, I knew someone who worked there, and they also were looking, and people kept telling them that I would be the right person. But I think one thing is similar mindset. Like the founders, John Kelly and Liz Goff, we're all around the same age. We have a very similar work ethic, and we also just like, we're on the same page about 99% of things. And the minute I met them, I knew it. I was just like, these are my people. And so that does help. But I also think that, like we were talking about earlier, for me, I'm a media junkie or whatever. I love reading about media. I cover it a little bit, but I love looking at what is possible as a business model. How can you actually make this work? And what I know is that the way most of legacy publishing works is not a profitable business. And in many cases, it never was. It was just propped up by other things. And so now it definitely isn't. And what are people doing? I'm very interested in like the evolution of local news and the opportunity in local news. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I would, if I had money to invest, I would be investing in local news startups, things like that. And for me, as a journalist, when I worked at Forbes, I think I went through 4 rounds of layoffs. And this is after Lehman Brothers, 2008, 2009. It was hell. It was every week. It was someone else. And it was just really, really hard. And I remember I loved Fashionista, which is owned by Breaking Media, another startup, really, really scrappy. Sometimes felt like there wasn't enough resources. And one of the reasons I went to work at Lucky and Condé Nast was I, A, wanted to make more money, but B, wanted that experience of working at one of these big magazines. And I realized very quickly being there, this isn't going to end well. Like, I just could see it. I had enough experience and also was studying this stuff close enough to know this is not sustainable the way they're operating. And I would just rather be on the ground floor of something. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. At some point, especially when I went freelance, when I left Lucky, I realized, oh, I'm going to be able to make money no matter what. Like, that's not going to be an issue for me. I'll figure it out. But for me, the risk is, it is true. The risk is in staying somewhere where you know there's not a future, instead of trying to like make the future. And it sounds, I'm not trying to sound all high horse or whatever. It's really, I want to enjoy my life. I want to make money. I want to be able to go on vacation. I want to do all that stuff, but I really want to enjoy my work. And I think for me, there was not 1 second where I thought, in the same way, there was not 1 second when Imran asked me if I wanted to do full-time at BOF. I said yes, because I really believe in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I feel so lucky that I've worked at 2 places at least that have sustainable models that are looking towards the future of media, not at the past or trying to fix the past. It's just, we got to do things differently. How can we do that? And yeah, I mean, I remember growing up, there was a mean girl in middle school or high school who said, you were so lucky. Like, you're not, essentially saying like I didn't deserve everything I was getting. Like, I was just like a weirdly lucky person, given that like I grew up with a single mom and not like we didn't have money and all that stuff. And like, how was I getting all this stuff? I'll never forget it. But the thing was, like, she's kind of right. Like, I am a really fortunate person, but then I've spent my life kind of proving that I worked for all of it.
Yeah.
And it's been really satisfying. Like, I'm not going to lie. It has been.
I feel like even early in your story that you seem to be rooted in a really solid foundation, and you have like a really safe jumping off place, and have a mom who's telling you to go as far as you want, and you in fact should, and I'm going to learn from this, and I don't want to become complacent in a role.
Totally. Yes. Yeah, because what is the point? Like, what is the point of living if you're not pushing yourself and trying new things and
having fun? Yes,
having fun and messing up and it being hard. But I think we only get one shot, and I want it to be amazing.
Totally. I feel very similarly. I was on the fast track in tech, and it was like just printing money, you know, and that was to me something that I could always return to if I wanted to, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to pursue this idea that I had. I was annoyed that no one had solved this white space of like workwear and innovated it in any capacity, and I'm sitting at the forefront of the modernization of the workforce, and I was like, what's the worst that could happen? I re-entered corporate America, you know?
And what you do feels so good, and you can tell you feel good doing it, and people feel good wearing your clothes, and that is, it makes it feels like 360, like a real thing, and that's very exciting.
It's so fun. Yeah, it really is so fun. It's also so stressful, and I fail all the time, and fine. It's not at all easy, but there's so much growth in these choices. I want to talk more about Puck, but I do want to go back one step to talk about business of fashion, because I think that's where you like really are established as like capital F fashion too. So it's like, you know what you don't know, and you know what you're good at. And I think that that's evidenced in this conversation. And I think that you've honed in on a skill set and an opportunity in terms of business, the business of fashion specifically, and like these company profiles. Can you explain what the experience of having that front row seat at the time that you were there, which was very different than it is now, and in practice, just sort of what that job looked like?
It was awesome because I was the first employee in the US, and then Chantal Fernandez, who ended up, we wrote a book about Victoria's Secret together, she joined, and Chantal and I had similar career, not similar, like we had done different types of jobs. We had worked at a lot of the same publications. She had worked at Fashionista. She had also worked at Lucky during its final iteration. And we knew a lot of the same people, and we're very complementary from a reporting perspective. And so I recruited her really quickly. But I think in the early days, BOF started as truly, as I said before, a blog to kind of complement Imran's consulting work, like to market Imran's consulting work. And I think he realized very quickly, and it was one of the best things about working for him was he is not afraid to ask tough questions because he was paid to ask tough questions for 15 years or however long he worked at McKinsey. So he goes into a meeting with the CEO and he tells them what he thinks, and he also asks them really hard questions. And that made me realize, okay, again, if I think something, I have to ask it or say it or ask it, and just be he did not operate from a place of fear in that way with executives, which I think was very helpful for me. He was very confident in the way he approached talking to executives and analyzing their businesses. In terms of what I wrote about and how I sort of developed these profiles and this idea, I have always been really obsessed with brands and brand value. And so it can be a brand that sells $20 flip-flops. It can be a brand that sells $45,000 watches. If there's a story behind the brand, that is what's interesting to me. I learned a lot about how the industry works, how stories work. I think that BOF really changed the way a lot of press happens. You want to sell your company, you do a profile with Business of Fashion, you give them some numbers. Like, I started to see, these people want to sell their business and they know that the investors read us, so they're going to come to me with this, that type of thing. It was interesting because, it's all, there's a lot of strategy in there. And so that part of it was really fascinating too. And more than anything, it made me realize that when I worked at Forbes, they would always say no inside baseball stuff. They didn't want super insider because they were like, our reader won't understand this. It doesn't feel. The reality is the whole world is very inside baseball now. And also, the more specific you are, the more universal it is. So that idea of like, let's not touch this random little brand because it doesn't make enough money, but there may be a lesson in there that is valuable to Gucci. All of that is mixed together. So that's what the biggest thing that I got out of it was, understanding that the industry was becoming the center of the world. And when I worked there, it actually was. And so that was probably the most important thing, was that this industry deserves the weight of, tech or finance or what have you. And I think that set me up well for when Puck emerged.
What makes you decide to go deeper into Victoria's Secret and write a book on Victoria's Secret, of all the companies you're profiling and stories you're seeing and telling?
It's an interesting question. So I think the big thing, because Chantal and I were able to do it together, I think it kind of crossed over our interest base. But I would say I wanted to write something that I wasn't super close to be honest, because you get really in the weeds with a book, and I had covered them intermittently throughout the years, and Chantal and I had done a few stories together, and the way it ended up happening was that I introed her to one of my really good sources from the company, and she talked to them, and she called me after and said, I really think you should write a book about this. I said, well, why don't we do it together? It's just, with business books now, it used to be that you'd have like a team of researchers. You can't do that. You really need to team up with someone and to do the reporting right. And I think it is to me the story of American entrepreneurship in the past 50 years, and also brand as media. It was everybody talks about this fashion show, but even before that, they were really thinking. Les Wexner's favorite book was Making Movies by Sidney Lumet, and so and that didn't come out until the mid-90s, but you can see that in the way he developed the Victoria's Secret brand. It's very cinematic. It's very fantasy, all of that stuff. I wanted to do something that like my friends from high school would be interested in, but then also the people who read me on BOF. And it felt like universal enough in that way and specific enough in that it would be fun to write and report.
For those who are not familiar, how you cover the fashion industry at Puck and all coverage at Puck, it's unique compared to other publications.
Very unique.
In the best way, and I know I've touched on this, but it's very scoopy. It's it includes elements of like industry speculation. There is that aspect of like inside baseballness to it that you talked about. You've described your reporting as what happens in between the press releases.
Yeah.
Can you explain your process a bit, and how does this job look different from past ones that you've had?
The best way I could describe it, and I am still it's still a thing I need to go back and think about every day. So it used to be that I would have a notes page with notes about a company that could be 2 years long, where I would just plop in, if I got a little tidbit of information, I would plop it in. I always have like running story lists. But now I honestly have less because I'm writing so much, and also I really try to write to the tone of what's happening in the culture connected to the fashion industry. But I would say it's very iterative. So usually you would like do all your reporting and do a big story. You write about a company every 6 months at most. Here I write about companies every single week. And so in today's newsletter, I had a small item about there's going to be this show about Barney's that the people who did Gossip Girl are developing. And I found out that they are working on opening some sort of Barney store concept. Whether or not that's going to be permanent, I have no idea. But usually, if I was working somewhere else, I would hold that information and keep finding it until I knew exactly every single element of it. And I know this part is correct. So next week, I'll have a little bit more. And next week, I'll have a little bit more. And so that's it's sort of, you're sort of layering on the conversation rather than just kind of putting it all out there. The thing that's so fun about Puck is, I'm talking to C-suite executives constantly, and these people really trust me with a lot of information. It has taken time for them a lot of them knew me, and so they already trusted me, but to understand that if they're talking to me, it's not, it helps them, of course, and it can help with their positioning, but it is also for the fun of it and because they like the work. Whereas, most journalism right now, especially in the fashion industry, is extremely transactional. It's like, I'll buy advertising, you write this piece, that's it, and then we'll sell clothes, or we'll sell a handbag because you wrote about it. That is not, we're doing it I think it's burnishing the industry itself and giving it weight compared to these other big industries, but it's not about like trying to help them sell clothes directly. And so that is different.
It's so refreshing. Having started Argent exactly 10 years ago and watching the transformations happen, the pay-to-play model, it's so inauthentic, and customers can root out inauthenticity in a half a second.
Yeah.
And I think that it has undermined just like all of these publications that have been built up over years and any credibility they had, a lot of them, because it's just this pay-to-play.
Yes.
And I think that it ends up just having a diminishing return for all parties.
Totally. It's not, nobody wants to read that stuff, and people don't really want to read a lot anyway.
Yeah, totally.
So it just it has no value. It's just a sort of the way things have always worked. And I did an interview a couple of months ago where the journalist said it's a retraining of people. And so I think, you worked in tech. I just approach it the way a tech reporter would, or a business reporter. And some people who work in the industry understand that because they worked outside of the industry, but some people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they'll be like, but that's not how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, but this is how the world actually works. And I always say, I'm number one. This industry is just going to get bigger and more closely watched. And as that happens, there are going to be more people covering it in a more rigorous way. That is what I would say. I'm not saying that's my goal, but that's what I would hope happens, that there is just much more examination because it will be better for it.
I would love to close out by asking some advice. So, the work you're doing at Puck is so indicative of how people consume media, not just fashion media. I think all pillars are, I'm consuming all of it, you know.
Amazing. That's so great to hear.
Yeah, it's just, it's meeting the moment and evolving with, you know, where we are, I think.
Yeah.
What's one piece of more old school advice aspiring journalists should follow to be successful today? And what's one thing they should be doing to stay on the cutting edge?
Pick up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was at BOF, I had moved to LA and it was during COVID and we were all remote working, and I met with one of the younger writers when I came to New York, and she said, "How do you get sources?" And I said, "Oh, you weren't in a newsroom sitting there with people to hear how they do it." And I think, you know, maybe texting is this generation's version of picking up the phone. I don't know. I think there is tremendous value in still picking up the phone. I don't love talking on the phone either. I still think when someone's calling me that something bad happened, but I do think it's really valuable. And it also just, if you have a query or a question or someone's upset or something, it's so much better to talk to someone and not text or email or whatever. I think and pick up the phone, just get out there. Like, go to events, be out and about. If you want to be a reporter, if you want to be an editor, that's a different thing. But if you want to be a reporter, you have to be open and be willing to, even though you and I have been trying for 3 years to get together, we've been trying. Like, just try. And I think in terms of being on the cutting edge, the thing I would say is that you really just have to not be set in your ways. You have to understand that even if you have to know that getting to the end goal, whatever that is, the end goal might not look like what you think it's going to look like. Like I said, Puck didn't exist when I started. Business of Fashion didn't exist when I started. Fashionista didn't exist. None of these places existed when I graduated from college in 2004. And most of the places I wanted to work don't exist anymore. So I think there is also a thing of, there's a lot of talk right now about print and saving print, and print can't die, and people love print, and I don't think print is going to die. There are still record players. My kid is still playing albums from the 70s. Sesame Street says 70s albums on our little dinky record player, but it doesn't have the same purpose it once did. And I think one thing, I've been writing a lot about Anna Wintour, and I have for years, but the last few months, because there's a lot about her and the future of American Vogue. The thing that I've learned about reporting on her, and I don't know her well at all personally, I just have written about her for a long time, she really looks ahead. And I think that that's the thing for young journalists. Don't be stuck in the idea of it has to be a certain way. If you do good work and you put yourself out there and you feel like you do it with integrity, it will exist, but you also have to kind of take the initiative. That was a really long answer.
Excellent, though. This whole conversation, I mean, I could talk for hours. Now we've come to my favorite part of the episode. It's a quick segment of Would You Rather.
Amazing.
Would you rather start work at the crack of dawn or burn the midnight oil?
Crack of dawn.
Would you rather write on a tight deadline or write on a loose deadline?
Tight deadline.
I already know the answers based on our conversation. Would you rather go back to school to learn a new skill or teach what you know to a class of newcomers?
I think that's hard. I think teach what I know at this point. As much as I never felt like I got as much as I could out of school because I was so busy thinking about what was next. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I had, but the reality is that's just who I am, and I would have more fun in front of the classroom.
Would you rather land the scoop on a major designer shuffle or major editor move?
Oh man, designer shuffle.
Would you rather only cover prestige luxury brands or only cover mass brands?
Prestige. But I will say that's only because that's what has been at the center of culture in the last 10 years. If it was 1992, it would have been mass.
Yes, yeah. Would you rather only answer emails with emojis or only answer calls on FaceTime?
Emojis. I've like way overused emojis.
Would you rather wear the same look to work every day or have to wear every trend you write about once?
Wear the same look to work every day.
Would you rather accidentally leave your mic unmuted or your camera on?
Oh man, I think camera on.
Oh, that's telling.
Yeah, because I definitely am I give my opinion way too often.
I'm always surprised when people actually choose mic unmuted. Would you rather start a career as a fashion journalist in the early aughts or in the present day?
Early aughts.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. This is like over delivered on.
Oh man, thank you. This was so fun. I'm so honored, and it was such a pleasure. I have a million questions. You have to come on mine, and we can talk about your stuff because now I have a million questions for you.
Yes, please. I mean, this is so fun. Thank you. Please check out Lauren's newsletter, Line Sheet, and her podcast, Fashion People. We'll drop all the links to follow in the episode description. Lauren, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sally. This was so great.
Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sally Christensen, and we'll see you next time.
Work Friends.
Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli with editing by Ryan Woldoff. Our theme music is by Karina DePiano and Melanie Naima. This episode was recorded at Podhead Studios in Los Angeles, California.